It's fairly easy these days with the net. Looked up an average figure for solar radiation, and it turns out that we receive 10,000 times as much energy from the sun every year as we use in energy from all forms. 10,000 to 1. So although I'm not suggesting that this transformation from a carbon economy to a solar economy is going to be an easy one, that statistic does at least suggest that it's possible. It's more of a challenge to our ingenuity than being an intractable situation. So that diagram just summarizes some of those synergies. And really the idea was to create a long hedge of greenhouses facing the prevailing wind direction. And then at intervals along the way, we would have these concentrated solar power plants. And then this image tries to capture the main elements of the project. So you've got the sea in the distance to the right. You've got 3 strips of greenhouses, growing crops inside and outside the greenhouses with some of the surplus water. And then at intervals along the way, we have these CSP plants. So it's a model for how we could create zero carbon food, abundant electricity, as well as really significant quantities of water in some of the most water-stressed parts of the planet, and revegetating areas of desert. And of course, if you're making surplus water, then that makes all sorts of other things possible. It makes human habitation possible, and it makes it possible for parts of the world that are struggling with subsistence agriculture to get out of that poverty trap, to get on the road towards sustainable development. Another biomimicry principle that we've applied to this, very similar to the ideas we applied to the Plastiki expedition, is to think of all waste as an opportunity. If you redefine waste as just underutilized resources, then it immediately reveals an opportunity. And clearly, if we're evaporating millions of tons of seawater, we're going to be left with quite a lot of salt. And it's interesting that different things crystallize out at different stages. And the first thing to crystallize out is calcium carbonate. The image on the left there is one of the evaporator panels on the greenhouse after it's been in use for a while, gradually getting encrusted with calcium carbonate. And after a while, once it's become heavily encrusted, you can take that out and use it as a lightweight building block. It's very cheap material. It's just made from recycled cardboard with a wax finish, so it's pretty cheap to do. And if you use that as a building material and you think about the carbon in that, that carbon would have come out of the atmosphere into the sea and then into a building product, which is quite handy. The next thing to crystallize out is sodium chloride, ordinary table salt. You can actually build with that as well. You can compress that. This is a hotel in Bolivia made out of salt. And one of the house rules is that you're not allowed to lick the walls. Why you want to, I don't know. But at the moment, we're just joking that we're going to try and satisfy Kensington's demand for overpriced and pompously packaged table salt. Some might say that demand is insatiable, but we're going to give it a jolly good go. The next one is actually a very valuable compound. It's magnesium chloride. And you can use that as a desiccant in low-energy cooling systems. One of the most benign ways of achieving air conditioning is using evaporative cooling and then desiccant to take that moisture out of the air. So in the very parts of the world where increasingly we're likely to need some form of cooling, here's a way of doing it in a very benign way. And remember I mentioned peak phosphate, which became a bit of an obsession of mine and David's. Well, when I was researching peak phosphate, I discovered another use for magnesium chloride. Apparently, if you add it to human liquid waste, it takes out nearly all the valuable nitrates and phosphates and produces a compound called struvite, which you can use directly as a fertilizer. So we think there's scope for another product in Kensington there with some good packaging. You never know what people will buy. And then after that, you get pretty much every element of the periodic table, including uranium and gold. We're not under any illusions that it's going to lead to this, but it is possible that we'll be able to extract some of those useful compounds that have ended up in the sea as a result of pollution and our kind of sloppy approach to applying agrochemicals and the way we make things, get that out of the sea and back into the land. And hopefully we could take out all the plastic pollution as well and maybe send it back to DuPont as a nice little present. So that summarizes some of the synergies of that system and the sort of productivity of the system. So it's a system that's starting to operate in the same way as an ecosystem, with the same kind of remarkable efficiencies, closed loop efficiencies. And this is the stage where now we're we've just completed a feasibility study, and next year we're hoping to build a small-scale demonstration version of it so that we can prove what we've predicted through our theoretical calculations. And then in the design process, we can actually look at all those organisms I mentioned as ways to refine the design. We can learn from camel's nostrils, we can learn from the sand skink possibly to develop scratch-free coatings. We could learn from the thorny devil, and maybe we can even learn how to manufacture reflective coatings just using proteins. So without the massive and intensive use of energy that we currently use. So for instance, the mirrors on that scheme would probably represent the biggest single bit of embodied energy. If we could make those the way nature makes reflective surfaces, with proteins at room temperature and ambient pressure, then we'd achieve a really radical reduction in the amount of energy used. So to draw together some conclusions now, and returning to those two questions that I posed at the beginning, the question of whether we can make things in a way that keeps materials in closed loop cycles, whether we can make that difficult, bold shift from a carbon economy to a solar economy. Well, I firmly believe that those transformations are possible. And not just possible, they are critical. I firmly believe that we need to make those transformations. I believe biomimicry has a lot of the solutions. And I think projects like the Plastiki expedition and the Sahara Forest project will demonstrate that it's not just possible, that it's beneficial, that you can actually create more value out of being more imaginative with waste. And for pretty much every challenge that we face, whether it is finding energy, manufacturing benign materials, harvesting fresh water, there will be examples that we can follow in nature, benefiting from a 3.8 billion year R&D period. And it's possible that by learning from nature, we could learn to become not just better stewards of the planet, but maybe we could even learn how to transform aridity into abundance. Thank you for listening. Any questions?
You developed a replacement for fiberglass.
Yeah.
I was reading about David's concern about losing a couple of bottles along the way. Why didn't you just go with the fiberglass solution of a standard hull, as it were?
Well, we clearly could have just melted the bottles down and just made it a plain old boat, just using a sheet material. But that would have been a very ordinary looking boat. It wouldn't have been particularly special, it wouldn't have been particularly ingenious. So we decided to make life very difficult for ourselves by using bottles as much as possible in their unadulterated form. So it was very clear to people that this was a boat made out of bottles, and that you can transform waste into not just a usable product, but something that has a level of sort of refinement and elegance and ingenuity about it. The risk element is partly why it's been a very involved design process, and it's been through very elaborate testing, and the bottles are pretty well secured with a netting. So I'm pretty confident that we won't lose any bottles. We'll see. Yes?
Is SL packaging expensive?
At the moment, it costs more than fiberglass, but that's only because it's at very early stages. Once it goes into production and it scales up, it shouldn't be any more expensive than fiberglass. And if you were to sort of factor in the costs, the true costs of fiberglass, the costs of all atmospheric pollution and so on, then I think a true life cycle cost would show that it's much cheaper. So thank you very much for coming, and thank you for your questions, and thank you for your interest in the Plastiki expedition.